What truly devastating tragedy, unfolding right within the walls of your child's school, proved to be horrifyingly, infuriatingly preventable. For 5 long months, ever since my daughter, Leah, first stepped onto campus as a wide-eyed freshman, she had been systematically stalked, followed home by the same 3 menacing seniors. And for 5 long months, the school's only utterly dismissive response to our increasingly desperate pleas had been that infuriating, age-old cliché, boys will be boys, a phrase that now, in retrospect, felt like a premonition, a hollow echo of the horror to come. Then, last Monday, the world shifted on its axis. I was in the middle of a mundane lunch at work, the clatter of forks and casual chatter a stark contrast to the terror that was about to erupt, when my phone vibrated with a series of frantic, increasingly panicked texts from Leah, each one sliced through my composure like a razor. They're in the girls' bathroom. Read the first, stark and chilling. The next, they're trying to climb into my stall. Please help, Dad. I'm so scared, so scared. The words seared into my brain, painting a vivid, nightmarish tableau. The image of her tiny, terrified form, trapped and vulnerable, ignited a primal, desperate surge of adrenaline. Without even realizing it, my chair clattered to the floor behind me, an exclamation mark of my abrupt departure. My phone was already pressed to my ear, the school's number dialing before my feet had even fully left the ground, as I sprinted through the sun-drenched parking lot, the asphalt blurring under my desperate haste. Secretary's desk. I barked into the phone, my voice raw and uneven. How can my daughter? She's in the bathroom right now, 3 seniors. They're climbing into her skull. There was a beat of silence on the other end, a pause that felt like an eternity, stretching top with my building dread. Then, a voice, annoyingly calm, asked, which bathroom? Which bathroom? Was she truly asking which bathroom at a moment like this? I jammed my car key into the ignition, the engine roaring to life as I sped away, tires squealing in protest. 3rd floor, I think. I don't know. Just find her. I bellowed, the words tumbling out, laced with a growing hysteria. The secretary offered no further words, no reassurance. Her name is Leah Clarks. They're attacking her right now. Sir, she began, her tone maddeningly measured, as if discussing overdue library books. Unfortunately, the rules state I cannot leave my secretary desk unattended, and the principal is unavailable on her lunch break right now. Unavailable. Lunch break? Was she serious? Had she not heard the terror in my voice, the urgency of my plea? I practically screamed the next part, my voice cracking with pure, unadulterated rage. Are you stupid? What are you talking about? Go to the bathroom now? Sir, she replied, her voice now edged with a condescending sweetness, as if addressing a misbehaving child. Please refrain from using vulgar language. They're climbing into your daughter's stall, you say. I'll make a note for when the principal returns. A note. I hung up abruptly, the phone almost shattering against the dashboard. It was then that the chilling realization solidified. I wasn't speaking to a human being, but a meticulously programmed, unfeeling robot, utterly devoid of empathy or initiative. Leah hadn't texted in for excruciating minutes. For minutes felt like a lifetime, each second a hammer blow of dread. 8 minutes later, I slammed on the brakes, abandoning my car sideways in the bus lane, its hazard lights flashing uselessly, a testament to my utter disregard for rules or consequences. I burst through the front doors of the school, a whirlwind of fear and fury. The secretary, still glued to her computer, looked up, her mouth opening, no doubt to recite the tired litany of signing procedures. But I was already a blur past her, a phantom of desperate speed. I ran to that bathroom faster than I had ever run in my entire life, my lungs burning, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. But when I reached it, the polished steel door looming ominously, and my hand reached for the handle, my very worst nightmare came roaring to life. It was locked, from the inside. A cold, nauseating wave of dread washed over me, the boys. They must have somehow gotten the keys, not just to trap her, but to deliberately do this, to make her inaccessible, to ensure her screams went unheard. I pressed my ear against the cold, unyielding metal, and the sound that filtered through were a guttural punch to my gut. I could hear them in there, with her. Leah's whimpering cries, then the sickening rustle of fabric, the unmistakable sound of clothing being ripped. And then, her crying intensified, morphing into a strangled, muffled screaming, a sound that spoke of a hand clamping cruelly over her mouth, silencing her pleas, suffocating her terror. Leah, I'm here, I screamed, slamming my shoulder against the door with all the force I could muster, a desperate, animalistic roar. But these were the new doors, installed with such fanfare after that horrific shooting 4 years ago, designed for an entirely different kind of protection. Reinforced steel frames, built to withstand a siege. The door didn't even tremble, not a single tremor. Desperate, I snatched a heavy plastic chair from the hallway and swung it with the full, unbridled force of a father's rage. The chair exploded into 1,000 plastic shards. A pathetic, useless burst, while the door remained utterly, perfectly impervious, a mocking monument to my powerlessness, the fire extinguisher. It was heavier. I seized it, a blunt weapon, and hammered it against the lock mechanism, again and again, the sickening clang of metal ringing through the empty, echoing hallway. A dreadful soundtrack to my unraveling hope. But these doors, tragically, agonizingly, were doing exactly what they had been designed to do. They were unbreakable. By now, the secretary had finally made her way up the stairs, panting, her face a bright, indignant red. "Sir," she huffed, each word punctuated by a gasp for air. "You are destroying school property. I'm calling security. Give me the key." I roared, my voice ragged, raw, completely consumed by fury and despair. She visibly flinched, recoiling from the sheer, unbridled intensity of my anger. "I don't have bathroom keys, sir," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. "Only the principal has those, and she's." But before she could even finish her utterly useless sentence, I was already sprinting towards the principal's office, fueled by a new, horrifying surge of purpose. I finally reached it, the door a dark, unyielding barrier. Through the window, I saw her, casually ensconced at her desk, utterly oblivious, slowly eating a salad and scrolling through her phone. Lost in some digital abyss while my daughter's world was being torn apart mere floors away. I pounded on her door, hard enough to rattle the very walls, a desperate, thundering demand for her attention. She finally looked up, her gaze slow and annoyed, held up 5 fingers, mounted 5 minutes, pointed to her salad with an imperious gesture, and then, inexplicably, went back to scrolling. It was in that moment of sickening indifference that the security guard appeared behind me, his hand already resting on his radio, a silent threat. "Sir," he intoned, his voice deep and authoritative, "you need to calm down." But I didn't. I couldn't. Calm was a foreign concept, utterly incompatible with the swirling maelstrom of fear and rage consuming me. I saw another chair, heavier, sturdier, and picked it up, the weight of it a solid anchor in my trembling hands. The principal, finally seeing me raise it, her head snapping up from her phone, her eyes suddenly wide with genuine fear. A chilling moment of realization that broke through her self-imposed bubble of detachment. I swung the chair, not at her, but through her window, a deafening explosion of glass shattering everywhere,
Scritch.
spraying across her pristine office,
Drip.
a sudden, violent punctuation mark to her blissful ignorance. She screamed, a sharp, piercing sound, dropping her salad, its contents scattering like pathetic confetti. I reached through the jagged, broken frame, my hand tearing on a shard of glass, blood already beginning to drip onto her plush carpet, and fumbled for the lock. I found it, and locked. "Sir, stop," the security guard yelled, finally moving, grabbing my arm, his grip firm. But I was beyond stopping, beyond reasoning. I shoved him off, a primal force of nature, and went straight for her desk, yanking open drawers with frantic, desperate efficiency until my fingers closed around the familiar jingle of a keyring. "You're insane," the principal shrieked, her voice now a frantic, high-pitched wail. "I'm calling the police." But I was already gone, running back to the bathroom, the keys jangling wildly in my hand, leaving a trail of bloody handprints smeared across the hallway walls, each one a testament to my frantic, desperate journey. When I finally reached the bathroom, my heart a raw, bleeding wound in my chest, the door was already open. An ominous silence had settled over the space, heavy and suffocating. The boys were gone, vanished, and there, curled on the cold, unforgiving tiles of the bathroom floor, was my dear Leia, her small body an image of utter devastation. Her skirt was torn, her lips bruised puppy, and an unspeakable white, sticky liquid coated her hair, clinging to it like a shroud. Her shirt was unbuttoned, gaping open, and her bra, once a private shield, was savagely torn. Instinctively, my hand flew to my phone, dialing 911, the number a lifeline in the overwhelming chaos. I knelt beside Leia, my own world crumbling around me, pulling off my jacket to wrap around her trembling form, shielding her from the cruel world. It was then, in that sacred, agonizing moment, that the principal burst in, security guard in tow, her face contorted with a mixture of rage and fear, her own self-preservation now overriding any shred of humanity. "You assaulted me," she shrieked, her voice shrill, piercing the air. "Jim, he could have killed me with that chair." I was already speaking to the dispatcher, my voice a broken whisper, one hand clutching the phone, the other gently stroking Leia's cheek as she choked out blood and tears. Her small body racked with sobs, but the principal, utterly oblivious to the shattered girl on the floor, continued her frantic tirade, pacing wildly, gesturing emphatically. "You've traumatized my entire staff. Every student on this floor saw you acting like a maniac. That's 200 children who will need counseling." The security guard, now her complicit witness, was dutifully filming everything on his phone, a grotesque documentation of her skewed reality. "This is going to be on the news," the principal continued, her voice now directed at someone on her own phone, undoubtedly reaching out to a higher authority. "A parent going psychotic, destroying property, creating an unsafe learning environment. Our insurance doesn't cover parental attacks. The superintendent is going toys." "Hello," she suddenly interrupted herself, her tone shifting, becoming sickeningly theatrical. "We have a violent intruder here who threatened me with a weapon." She proceeded to give my physical description, painting me as a premeditated aggressor, a deranged maniac. Never once, not a single mention, did she utter a word about the 3 boys, or the horrifying reason for my desperate, violent outburst. When the police finally arrived, a mere 4 minutes later, their sirens a wailing testament to the principal's distorted narrative, she pointed at me first, her finger unwavering, accusing. "That's him, the one who attacked me." 2 officers immediately moved towards me, their faces grim, while 2 more, thankfully, pushed past them, their attention finally drawn to Leia. The first officer placed a firm hand on my shoulder, gently, but firmly, guiding me away from my daughter, away from the only person I wanted to be with. I tried to explain, to tell him about the 3 boys, about Leia, about the utter systemic failure that had led to this horror. But he simply shook his head, his voice devoid of emotion, saying, "We talk at the station?" My hands, still raw and bleeding, were still dripping, each crimson drop a searing reminder of the battle I had fought, and tragically, lost. A chilling crimson seeped from the shattered window glass, forming an ominous pool that spread across the cold, tiled bathroom floor. In a flare of urgent motion, the paramedics burst through the doorway, their medical bags clutched tightly in gloved hands. Their trained eyes immediately fixated on Leah, a small, vulnerable figure still tightly curled into herself on the unforgiving cold tiles, her stillness a stark contrast to their hurried arrival. With practiced efficiency, they began their swift, initial assessment, their hands moving with quiet determination. A quiet but firm voice cut through the tension. "We need a gurney over here." I remained frozen in the doorway, a silent, helpless observer. The insistent weight of the officer's hand still heavy on my shoulder, a physical anchor to my constrained reality. Meanwhile, the principal, a whirlwind of agitated pronouncements, was already monopolizing another officer's attention. Her voice, shrill and accusatory, sliced through the air, painting a vivid, distorted picture of my supposed crazed outburst and violent assault on her office, a narrative she seemed eager to establish as irrefutable truth. Her finger, trembling with self-righteous indignation, repeatedly jabbed in my direction as she hurled epithets like violent and unstable, each word designed to dehumanize and condemn. Adding another layer to this public shaming, Jim, with a smug, almost triumphant air, held his phone aloft, its screen displaying the damning video footage he had so meticulously captured. Yet, amidst this swirling vortex of accusations and evidence, a chilling silence persisted. Not a single person, not a single voice, raised the crucial questions. What about the three boys? Why had I been so desperate, so insistent, on getting into that bathroom in the first place? It was as if these vital pieces of the puzzle simply ceased to exist, erased from their collective consciousness. With gentle, practiced hands, the paramedics carefully transferred Leia's slight form onto the waiting gurney. They then drew a stark white sheet over her, a shroud that felt less like comfort and more like a barrier obscuring her from the world, while her eyelids remained stubbornly pressed shut. A silent testament to her trauma. An instinctive urge to follow my daughter, to be near her, propelled me forward, but the officer's arm, a rigid, unyielding bar across my chest, instantly blocked my desperate path. His voice, devoid of empathy, delivered the cold, hard pronouncement. "You are being detained for assault and destruction of property." Each word felt like a physical blow, stripping away my agency, my right to protect my own. Through a haze of disbelief and despair, I watched, utterly helpless, as they wheeled my daughter's gurney down the sterile, unforgiving hallway. Her fragile presence receding further and further from my reach. The principal, meanwhile, continued her theatrical performance, regaling anyone within earshot with her version of events, each word of further condemnation. As if to underscore her narrative, the cold, unforgiving metal of handcuffs clicked around my wrist right there in the bustling hallway. A public spectacle of my newfound criminality. From the ominous dark rectangles of their classroom doorways, students peered out, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and shock. Several, with a disturbing detachment, already had their phones raised, their screens alight, capturing every humiliating detail of my arrest for posterity or perhaps for social media. The officers, with a dispassionate efficiency, escorted me past the gauntlet of those staring, judgment-filled young eyes. As I was led away, I managed to snatch one final poignant glimpse of Leia on the gurney, her small hand enveloped in the comforting grip of a kind-faced female paramedic who leaned in, murmuring soft, reassuring words into her ear. A small, bitter comfort pierced through my despair. At least someone was extending kindness and gentleness to my daughter, a stark contrast to the dehumanizing way they were treating me. A mother reduced to nothing more than a criminal. They ushered me into the sterile confines of the police car's back seat, the door clicking shut with a definitive thud. As we sped towards the station, I barraged them with desperate questions about Leia, my voice cracking with worrying, but their responses were uniformly curt. A dismissive wave of the hand, save it for the detective. At the station, the grim, impersonal ritual of the booking process unfolded. My fingers, trembling slightly, were pressed onto ink pads, then onto paper, capturing my unique identifiers. Against a stark white wall, a flash illuminated my face, taking the dehumanizing mugshots that would forever brand me as an arrestee. My hands, still bearing the raw evidence of the earlier struggle, were bleeding. They had to be meticulously cleaned, the paramedics' quick check apparently deemed insufficient, before the officers could obtain the good prints their procedures demanded. When, after what felt like an eternity, they finally granted me my single, precious phone call, my priorities were crystal clear. I didn't waste it on a lawyer, for my daughter's well-being superseded all legal concerns in that harrowing moment. My call to the hospital was met with a frustrating wall of policy. They politely, yet firmly, refused to divulge any information about Leia, citing privacy protocols since I wasn't physically present, leaving me suspended in a torment of uncertainty. The only vague reassurance they offered was that she had been examined, reiterating that I would have to present myself in person to receive any further details, a cruel irony. Given my current predicament, it was only much later that I learned of a silver lining amidst the storm. A victim advocate, a beacon of support, had met Leia at the hospital, guiding her through the harrowing, deeply personal sane sexual assault nurse examiner exam. All this transpired while I, her mother, remained helplessly trapped and isolated within the sterile confines of that holding cell. This compassionate woman, a stranger, became Leia's steadfast anchor, remaining by her side through the entirety of the intrusive, emotionally draining process. She patiently explained each daunting step, her voice a calming presence, ensuring Leah felt as little fear as possible during such a vulnerable time. Meanwhile, the meticulous, time-consuming process of evidence collection involving countless photographs, delicate swabs, and precise measurements stretched on 4 hours. I endured those same hours in custody, a crushing weight of ignorance pressing down on me, utterly clueless about the traumatic procedures my daughter was undergoing. Finally, as dusk began to settle, they released me that evening, not with an apology, but with a terse citation and a court date, specifically for the property damage charges, a small victory. Perhaps, but one overshadowed by the day's events. The desk sergeant, his voice flat and perfunctory, casually mentioned that the principal isn't pressing assault charges at this time. A phrase delivered with such a dismissive air that it seemed to imply I should feel grateful, as if she were bestowing some magnanimous favor upon me. My feet, fueled by a potent cocktail of relief and desperate urgency, practically flew across the station parking lot. I scrambled into my car, the engine roaring to life, and drove with a singular, unwavering focus straight to the hospital, a mother's only destination. I found Leah in a quiet room on the 3rd floor, her physical wounds seemingly tended to and her person clean, but her eyes, those usually bright windows to her soul, now held an unsettling emptiness. When I instinctively moved quickly towards her bed, a sudden, almost imperceptible flinch rippled through her small frame, a stark indication of her shattered sense of safety. Her voice, a fragile whisper barely audible, conveyed a heart-wrenching paradox. "Don't touch me," she pleaded, a desperate need for personal space, immediately followed by the equally desperate, "But please don't leave either." Her words were a raw exposure of her vulnerability, her deep need for presence coupled with a fear of physical contact. Understanding the delicate balance, I gently pulled a chair close to her bedside, close enough for her to sense my comforting presence, to know I was there, but mindful to leave the precise amount of physical space her traumatized spirit so desperately required. We sat in that quiet room, enveloped in a profound silence, a sanctuary from the chaos, until the moment was broken by the arrival of Detective Paula Norris, her presence announced by the crisp rustle of her notebook. Adhering to standard protocol, she requested to interview us separately, beginning with me in the hushed hospital hallway, while a compassionate nurse remained by Leia's side. Providing continuity of care and comfort, with painstaking clarity, I recounted the precise timestamps from Leia's desperate texts, painting a picture of the unfolding events. I emphasized the callous indifference of the secretary, who had refused to budge from her desk, and the principal's dismissive gesture, holding up 5 fingers, a chilling symbol of her priority for lunch over Leia's urgent plea for help. Detective Norris, a master of poker face neutrality, meticulously jotted down notes, her expression largely unreadable. However, a flicker of something, a subtle tightening in her jaw, did not escape my notice when I detailed the principal's dismissive 5-finger signal, a tiny crack in her impassive facade. After our interview, she moved to speak with Leah. Through the closed door, I could discern the low hum of their soft voices, a muffled conversation, the specific words themselves indistinct, leaving me to imagine the difficult exchange. Soon after, the hospital discharge planner, a woman laden with the weighty responsibility of post-trauma care, arrived, her arms overflowing with a thick stack of pamphlets. These booklets, a deluge of information, detailed everything from typical trauma responses and vital therapy resources to a comprehensive outline of what we should brace ourselves for in the disorienting days ahead. Her methodical discourse covered crucial topics like safety planning, the necessity of follow-up appointments, and a reassuring list of numbers to contact should we find ourselves overwhelmed and in need of immediate assistance. My traumatized brain, however, felt like a faulty circuit, utterly incapable of processing the sheer volume of information she was relentlessly throwing at us, a torrent of clinical terms and daunting concepts concerning counseling, support groups, and the labyrinth of medical follow-ups. She continued, unfazed, about normal reactions to abnormal situations, the nonlinear path of recovery, and a myriad of other psychological terms that, in my state of profound shock and exhaustion, simply drifted over my head like wisps of ungraspable fog. My mind, however, clung fiercely to a singular, primal thought, getting Leah home, making her feel safe again, and somehow, miraculously, beginning the monumental task of figuring out how to navigate and cope with the devastating aftermath of everything that had just violently upended our lives. The discharge nurse, with a gentle push, wheeled Leia's chair through the quiet hallways, bringing her to the emergency exit, where I had carefully maneuvered my car, ready for our departure. I carefully helped her settle into the passenger seat, and with an almost instantaneous, instinctive motion, she curled her body tightly against the cold glass of the window, seeking a semblance of comfort and protection in its familiar, yet distant, embrace. The drive home was enveloped in a heavy, palpable silence that stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was perhaps only 10 minutes, before Leah, her voice barely a breath, finally broke it. "Don't tell Grandma yet," she whispered, her voice a fragile plea. "Or anyone, please. I can't handle people knowing right now." Her words were a raw admission of her fear, her profound need to control the narrative of her own pain, to shield herself from the intrusive gaze of others. I simply nodded, a silent promise of understanding and compliance, and kept my eyes fixed on the road, my hands gripping the wheel, driving us towards a semblance of home. The remainder of the journey was punctuated only by the soft, intermittent sounds of her sniffling, a quiet symphony of unspoken grief and shock that filled the car's interior. Upon our arrival home, I gently lifted her small bag, carrying it inside, while Leia, her movements deliberate and slow, walked with a weary grace towards the familiar sanctuary of our front door. An urgent, almost ritualistic need for security propelled me through every single room. I meticulously checked each window, ensuring it was firmly latched, and tested every lock, a desperate attempt to fortify our fragile world against any further intrusion. The back door, a potential point of vulnerability, received an extra layer of protection, a sturdy chair wedged tightly beneath its handle, a crude but immediate barrier against perceived threats. Even though the afternoon sun still shone outside, I systematically pulled all the curtains closed, shrouding our home in a premature twilight, as if to physically shut out the intrusive, judgmental gaze of the outside world. My phone, a blinking testament to the day's chaos, showed a jarring tally of 14 missed calls, all from the school. Without a moment's hesitation or a second thought, I navigated to my contacts and, with a decisive tap, completely deleted their entry, a symbolic severance of a painful connection. Leia, a small, pensive silhouette, stood frozen in her doorway, her gaze fixed on her bed for what felt like an impossibly long moment, as if contemplating the very act of entering that once safe space. Then, with a subtle shift of her shoulders, she turned away from her room, opting instead for the more communal, perhaps less threatening, space of the living room. Understanding her silent quest for comfort, I went to the hall closet, retrieved her soft, well-worn favorite blanket, a familiar embrace, and brought it to her. She immediately cocooned herself within its folds on the living room couch, drawing the soft fabric tightly around her, and closed her eyes, attempting to shut out not just the light, but the world and its recent horrors. No words were exchanged about the prospect of school tomorrow, an unspoken understanding hanging heavy in the air between us. We both knew, with a painful certainty, that she wouldn't be going back anytime soon, if ever. Just then, the fragile quiet of our sanctuary was shattered by the insistent buzz of my phone, a fresh news notification intruding, reminding us that the outside world, with its relentless, often cruel, narratives, was still very much churning. And a cold dread seized me, twisting my stomach into a knot. The official communique from the school landed in my inbox like a lead weight, meticulously crafted yet chillingly devoid of truth. It spoke in careful, sanitized corporate jargon about a regrettable incident that caused unspecified property damage and a temporary disruption to the sacred learning environment. But the word assault, the very heart of the trauma my daughter endured, was conspicuously absent, vanished from their narrative as if it had never occurred. A calculated whitewash, a deliberate erasure of Leia's pain, and my blood ran cold. Even before I could fully process the school's audacious deflection, my phone began to vibrate incessantly, a relentless barrage of digital shaming. The comments section beneath the school's post, and on various local community forums, was already a raging inferno. Strangers, cloaked in the anonymity of the internet, hurled accusations like poison darts, branding me unhinged, dangerous, and a menace to society. They weren't just reacting to the school's bland statement. They were actively sharing the story, dissecting it, twisting it, and weaving their own prejudiced narratives about out-of-control parents and the breakdown of civility. Each notification felt like another stab, a collective judgment from a jury that hadn't heard a single word of the truth. How could such a distorted version of events gain so much traction so quickly? I slammed my phone face down onto the kitchen counter, hoping to silence the clamor, to escape the relentless assault of digital condemnation. Yet, even inverted, its persistent buzzing became an infuriating pulse, a constant reminder of the venomous narrative festering online, each vibration a fresh alert. Another wave of judgment washing over me. An hour later, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across our living room, and Leia finally drifted into a fragile, restless doze on the worn fabric of our old sectional sofa, the quiet calm was shattered by the shrill ring of my phone. It was Detective Norris, a name that, despite the circumstances, brought a flicker of grim hope. Her voice, crisp and professional, immediately cut through the lingering anxiety. She laid out the stark reality of the investigative process. It would be thorough, she emphasized, implying a meticulous, painstaking review of every detail, but also slow, a glacial pace that felt agonizing given the urgency of our pain. Crucially, she assured me that Leia, my brave but fragile daughter, would have a dedicated advocate by her side for every single step, a shield against further trauma, a voice to amplify her own. While her words maintained a strictly professional cadence, there was an unmistakable undercurrent of genuine empathy in her tone, a quiet acknowledgement of the emotional toll we were enduring, a subtle understanding that transcended mere procedural protocol. It wasn't pity, but a sense of shared humanity that offered a fragile lifeline. The appointment was set for 2 days later, a seemingly short span that stretched into an eternity, each hour a heavy tick of the clock, laden with anticipation and dread. The following morning, I tried to conjure an illusion of normalcy, preparing Leia's favorite breakfast, the aroma of cinnamon toast filling the kitchen. But her appetite remained elusive. She merely picked at the edges of her toast, her small hands trembling slightly, her gaze distant. Soon, she retreated back to the sanctuary of the couch, cocooning herself in her favorite fuzzy blanket, a fragile bird seeking shelter. Meanwhile, the relentless demands of my work emails piled up, a stark contrast to the emotional maelstrom engulfing our lives, a desperate attempt to cling to some semblance of routine. 3 agonizing days later, the air in the car on the way to the police station was thick with unspoken fears. Leia sat beside me, her knuckles white as she clutched a small stuffed animal, her usual bubbly energy replaced by a quiet, somber stillness. The imposing brick facade of the station loomed a symbol of justice, but also of the painful ordeal awaiting us. In the stark, utilitarian lobby, a kind-faced woman, Leia's promised advocate, greeted us with a gentle smile. She knelt down, introducing herself softly to Leia, her voice a soothing balm. As they walked hand in hand into a closed interview room, the door clicking shut behind them, a profound sense of helplessness washed over me. I was left alone, an outsider, separated from my child at her most vulnerable moment, a protective instinct warring with the knowledge that this was necessary. I sank into one of the unforgivingly hard plastic chairs lining the sterile hallway, each minute stretching into an eternity. My gaze remained fixed on the relentless sweep of the clock's second hand, 2 hours morphing into a testament to the agonizing crawl of time. Faces blurred as other people flowed in and out of the station, their lives continuing, oblivious to the silent vigil I kept. My world distilled to this solitary wait. Every fiber of my being taut with anxiety for my daughter. Finally, the door creaked open, and Leia emerged, her small shoulders slumped, her eyes heavy with an exhaustion that went beyond mere fatigue. Yet the advocate offered a reassuring smile, her words a balm. She did great. Detective Norris followed, her expression solemn but appreciative, confirming Leia's remarkable resilience. Your daughter was very brave. A wave of relief, potent and overwhelming, washed over me, mingled with a fierce pride for her strength. Back home, Leia, as if drawn by an invisible thread, gravitated immediately to the familiar comfort of the couch, sinking into its cushions like a ship returning to harbor after a storm, seeking refuge in its softness. The following afternoon, just as I was trying to piece together some semblance of order, a sharp knock at the door startled me. Standing on our porch was a stern-faced man, clipboard in hand, the unmistakable uniform of a process server. With a practiced, almost robotic motion, he extended a sheaf of official-looking papers, his only words a terse instruction. Sign here. The documents were a gut punch, and no trespass order. A chilling decree from the very school that had failed my child. It formally and indefinitely banned me from campus, citing safety concerns and property damage, a thinly veiled attempt to paint me as the aggressor, to control the narrative. The implications were immediate and severe. I was now persona non grata, branded a threat, simply for reacting to the school's egregious inaction. The sheer, breathtaking irony of them suddenly invoking safety concerns when their own dereliction had jeopardized Leia's safety so profoundly sent a tremor through my entire being. My hands, clutching the damning papers, began to shake uncontrollably, not just from anger, but from a profound sense of injustice. A bitter laugh caught in my throat. With a trembling hand, I scrawled my signature, a reluctant acknowledgement of this latest blow. The papers, crisp and official, joined the burgeoning stack in my incident fall, a chilling testament to the escalating battle we were now fighting. The incessant, frenzied blinking of my phone screen became too insistent to ignore. With a deep breath, I finally dared to look. What confronted me was a gut-wrenching betrayal, a video ruthlessly edited and strategically circulated, showing me in the exact moment I picked up the chair and shattered the principal's window. It was a masterclass in manipulation, carefully trimmed to begin just as my fury erupted, obliterating the crucial context. There was no preceding footage of the principal's dismissive gesture, her taunting display of 5 fingers, no audio capturing my desperate cries for Leia, nothing to explain the raw, incandescent rage that had driven my actions. It was a meticulously crafted lie, designed to condemn. The comments beneath the video were, if possible, even more brutal than before. The digital mob had found its smoking gun. Fellow parents, presumably horrified by the decontextualized footage, piled on with righteous indignation, labeling me violent, unstable, and a danger to children. The consensus was clear. Chillingly unanimous. People like you, they declared with self-righteous fervor, shouldn't be allowed anywhere near schools. The judgment was swift, merciless, and completely divorced from the truth. The vitriol was simply too much to bear. In a desperate act of self-preservation, a digital retreat from the relentless onslaught, I deleted my Facebook and Twitter accounts, severing the toxic connection rather than endure another moment of their hateful condemnation. That very evening, the corporate world, typically a sanctuary of structured predictability, began to intrude on my personal crisis. An email from my boss landed with an ominous thud in my inbox. Its tone was formal, guarded, inquiring about concerning reports he'd apparently received regarding my recent conduct. A meeting with HR was summarily scheduled for the following day, its mere mention laced with foreboding. The email's sterile language hinted at grave transgressions, conduct unbecoming and, most damningly, potential reputation damage to the company. The professional rug, it seemed, was beginning to be pulled from beneath my feet. My stomach plummeted, a cold, hard knot of dread forming as the full weight of the situation crashed down. This wasn't just a reprimand. This could cost me my livelihood. My ability to provide for Leia, sleep became an impossibility. I spent the entire night hunched over my kitchen table, frantically compiling documents, meticulously reconstructing a timeline of events, desperate to present a coherent defense against the looming threat of unemployment. The HR meeting itself was a clinical, uncomfortable interrogation. I sat under a barrage of probing questions, each one dissecting my judgment and decision-making under immense duress, every answer feeling inadequate against their cool, corporate scrutiny. The inevitable verdict followed: administrative leave, pending investigation, It was a suspension without pay, a professional limbo that further amplified the uncertainty and stress. 2 days after that demoralizing HR meeting, I found myself in the sleek, modern office of attorney Dimitri Lawson, located high up in a gleaming downtown skyscraper. The room exuded an air of quiet authority, with its polished dark wood and sumptuous leather chairs, a stark contrast to the sterile police station and my own chaotic life. Dimitri Lawson, a man whose calm demeanor belied his sharp legal mind, listened patiently, his pen scratching rhythmically across a legal-sized yellow pad as I recounted the harrowing sequence of events. He acknowledged the compelling argument of extreme circumstances, the primal parental instinct to protect, but his expression hardened as he delivered a sobering warning. The principal, he revealed, possessed significant political connections, a factor that could complicate our defense, turning a straightforward case into a politically charged battle. Almost immediately, he began outlining the grim realities of the legal landscape, discussing the uncomfortable possibilities of plea deals and reduced charges. The words felt like a betrayal. I wasn't ready to contemplate accepting guilt for what I saw as an act of desperate love, an attempt to save my daughter. Yet, his voice, though gentle, carried an undeniable weight as he explained the devastating potential consequences an aggressive fight against the property damage charges, he warned, could inadvertently make things worse for Leia's case, jeopardizing the very justice we sought for her. Another meeting was scheduled for the following week, a small reprieve, but one that left me suspended in a frustrating limbo, weighing impossible choices. Meanwhile, the focus shifted, however briefly, to Leia's healing. Her first appointment with therapist Samra Green was a step toward recovery. I drove her to the quiet clinic, my heart aching with both hope and trepidation, and watched her small figure disappear inside, knowing I had to give her space, even as every instinct screamed to protect her. Leia, recounting the session afterwards, described it as primarily paperwork and a safety assessment, a necessary but clinical start. Yet, amidst the formalities, Samra had already begun equipping her with vital tools, breathing exercises, Leia explained, demonstrating a slow, deliberate inhale and exhale, designed to combat the suffocating grip of panic attacks. Samra had also taught her how to ground herself to anchor her mind to the present moment, to tactile sensations, when the overwhelming tide of fear threatened to consume her. And in that moment, for the first time since the world had tilted on its axis, I saw a subtle shift in Leia's eyes, a fleeting glimpse of something less terrified, a spark of resilience that brought a flicker of light into the persistent gloom. Another appointment was set for 3 days later, a beacon of consistent support. The therapy office itself was a sanctuary of calm, hushed, with soft, diffuse lighting that seemed to gentle the sharp edges of trauma. Leia confided that Samra was nice, a simple but profound affirmation, and crucially, didn't push her to talk about things she wasn't ready for, respecting her pace, creating a much-needed space of psychological safety. On the drive home, in a poignant attempt to reclaim a sliver of lost normalcy, we stopped for ice cream. Neither of us truly craved the sugary treat. The joy it once promised felt distant, almost alien. But the act itself, the simple ritual, felt like something normal people would do, a fragile bridge back to a world that seemed irrevocably altered. Back in the house, the silence felt heavy, almost oppressive, amplifying the lingering unease. An instinctual, almost compulsive anxiety had taken root, compelling me to check the locks on every door and window, not once, but repeatedly, even though I knew, logically, I had already secured them twice over. The sense of security, once a given, was now a fragile illusion. 3 more days crawled by, each a testament to the grinding pace of bureaucracy, before a new voice intruded, Cullen Burgess, calling from the district office. He introduced himself as the Title IX coordinator, his title evoking a sense of official oversight, yet his words carried a detached, almost clinical tone. He needed to discuss the alleged incident at the school, he stated, his carefully chosen phrasing immediately raising my hackles. The repeated, almost rhythmic use of alleged and reported words designed to strip away certainty, to cast doubt on Leia's experience, not at me. Each utterance twisted my stomach, a visceral reaction to the deliberate linguistic distancing from the raw, undeniable truth. My voice, taut with urgency, cut through his formal preamble. What are you doing to keep Leia safe right now? I demanded, the present danger eclipsing all procedural niceties. His response, however, was a perfectly polished bureaucratic platitude. Everything has to follow proper process, he calmly explained, and we can't rush to judgment. The words, though seemingly reasonable, felt like a slap in the face. How could process be prioritized over a child's immediate safety? The frustration, a simmering inferno, erupted. I slammed the phone back into its cradle with far more force than I intended, the sharp crack a physical manifestation of my simmering rage and utter helplessness. The following morning, amidst this bureaucratic dance, a flicker of official action arrived. Certified letters from the school. Formal decrees stating that the 3 boys involved were strictly prohibited from contacting or coming anywhere near Leia. It was a step, albeit a painfully belated one, toward establishing some semblance of boundaries. Yet, that very same afternoon, a chilling counterpoint arrived. Leia's phone vibrated, an innocuous sound that heralded another insidious attack. An Instagram message, sent from a newly created, clearly fake account, flashed across her screen. The message was succinct, brutal, and utterly devastating. You ruined everything, though unsigned. The sender's identity hung heavy in the air. An unspoken truth that settled between us like a cold, venomous fog. We both knew who sent it. With a surge of protective fury, I immediately took screenshots of everything. The hateful message, the anonymous account details, the precise timestamp, every digital breadcrumb meticulously preserved as evidence of this continued torment. Leia's small hands, still trembling long after the screen had gone dark, were silent witness to the psychological assault. Even after I had swiftly forwarded all the incriminating evidence to Detective Norris, the lingering fear remained, a persistent tremor in her fingers, a constant echo of the threat. 2 hours later, a welcome ring pierced the oppressive silence. It was Detective Norris, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, her voice carried a note of genuine triumph, delivering the first glimmer of truly good news we had received. She confirmed a crucial breakthrough. The school, despite its earlier evasiveness, did indeed have security cameras strategically placed in the hallway near that infamous bathroom. More importantly, she had secured the footage. And there it was, undeniable, incontrovertible evidence, a clear timestamps sequence showing all 3 boys entering the bathroom area at the exact moment Leia's desperate text message to me began to arrive. The timestamps on the footage were damning. They revealed that this horrifying sequence of events unfolded precisely while the principal, the supposed guardian of student safety, was still comfortably seated at her desk, leisurely eating her lunch. The cold, hard pixels on the screen offered irrefutable proof, a silent and blinking witness to her shocking dereliction of duty. It wasn't merely that she could have helped. The evidence proved, unequivocally, that she chose not to. To further solidify the case, Detective Norris had also meticulously acquired all the phone records from that critical day. Every single text message Leia had frantically sent me was documented, meticulously logged with precise timestamps, painting a complete and undeniable picture of her distress. And there, starkly recorded, was my desperate call to the school at 12:47, a plea for help that, tragically, had gone unanswered by those sworn to protect. The secretary's frantic call to campus security, logging a report of mere property damage, landed at 10:03 a.m. sharp. A precise timestamp, yet an utterly hollow one, for in her clipped, administrative tone, not a single syllable hinted at the unspeakable truth that a student, my daughter Leia, had been brutally attacked. It was an omission that chilled me to the bone, a deliberate blindness that spoke volumes louder than any shouted lie. Yet, with each painstakingly gathered piece of evidence from grainy surveillance stills to Leia's own whispered accounts, our fragmented narrative began to coalesce, forging a timeline that grew not just stronger, but undeniably clearer. It felt like piecing together shards of shattered glass, each glinting with a sliver of the truth. Detective Norris, her expression a careful blend of resolve and weariness, affirmed our efforts, noting that this meticulous pattern of documentation would be absolutely instrumental in building a robust case. She understood, far better than the school administration, that truth lies in the details. Then, the clinical report from the school nurse landed, heavy as a stone, its contents a stark, brutal recounting of events. I remember clutching it, feeling the sterile paper against my trembling fingers, before a wave of nausea, sharp and sudden, seized me. I barely made it to the bathroom, retching until my throat burned, the words in that report echoing in my head like a torturous mantra. Those dispassionate, medical terms, describing with terrifying precision what had been done to my daughter, were far more horrifying than any monster conjured in a nightmare. They stripped away all euphemism, leaving only the raw, brutal reality of her suffering. But even amidst that profound despair, Detective Norris offered a sliver of grim hope, assuring me that this medical evidence, though agonizing to read, has moved everything forward in a significant, undeniable way. Driven by a desperate need for answers, for accountability, I attempted to sign up to speak at the upcoming school board meeting. I envisioned standing before them, my voice trembling but resolute, detailing every agonizing moment. But the woman on the other end of the phone, her voice polite yet firm, swiftly extinguished that hope. "I'm sorry, Mom," she stated, "but you cannot discuss specific student matters during the public comment portion of the meeting." It was a wall, smooth and unyielding, designed to silence, to deflect. So, with a deep, shaky breath, I pivoted. I began drafting remarks, not about Leia's specific ordeal, but about the glaring deficiencies in general school safety protocols, a strategic maneuver to circumvent their bureaucratic blockade. How could I maintain composure, articulate reasoned arguments, when every fiber of my being screamed to unleash the torrent of rage building within me, to expose the unspeakable injustice they had allowed? The silence was short-lived. An email soon arrived from a reporter at the local paper, a curious inquiry about our side of the story spurred by a viral video that had inexplicably begun circulating, hinting at the depths of the school's failure. While the urge to shed our truth from the rooftops was strong, I resisted, instead replying with a concise no, but strategically forwarding Detective Norris's contact information. Perhaps the unrelenting gaze of media pressure, like a magnifying glass focusing sunlight, could finally compel the district to do something, anything, beyond their calculated, corporate silence. Another call from Detective Norris, another ripple of apprehension. Her voice was guarded, hinting at something significant. A school custodian, a man whose daily routine involved the meticulous cleaning of that very bathroom area, had quietly approached her. He was a shadow in the school's sprawling hallways, observing without being observed. He'd seen those 3 boys loitering suspiciously that morning, their hands casually jingling with keys they clearly shouldn't have possessed. A flicker of worrying, dismissed perhaps at the time, now solidified into damning evidence. Though paralyzed by fear of reprisal, worried about his job, his livelihood, perhaps even his safety, he nonetheless agreed to provide a sworn, confidential statement, detailing precisely what he had witnessed. His courage, born of quiet observation, felt like a small, crucial victory. But the reprieve was fleeting. Dimitri, our lawyer, called, his voice laced with the kind of grave concern that immediately tightens your chest. The principal, in a stunning display of defensive maneuver, had filed for a restraining order against me, citing an absurd fear for her safety. It was a brazen, cynical tactic, designed not to protect her, but to paint me as unstable, dangerous, a loose cannon, before Leia's case could even gather momentum. Dimitri assured me, his voice a steadying anchor, that this was merely a desperate attempt to discredit me, to derail our pursuit of justice. Nevertheless, we would be forced into court the following week, another draining battle to fight, another hurdle placed squarely in our path. 2 agonizing weeks later, a fragile glimmer of hope emerged. Leia, with a courage that both humbled and terrified me, expressed a desire to try going back to school just for one class, a tentative step towards reclaiming a semblance of her former life. The counselor, cautiously optimistic, affirmed it as a very positive step forward. I drove her there, my heart a drumbeat in my chest, and walked her directly to the building entrance. My hand clasped tightly around hers, a silent promise of protection. She navigated the familiar, yet now menacing, hallway, making it almost to the threshold of her math classroom. Then, it happened. A subtle shift in the air, a fleeting scent of familiar cologne hit her, and her entire body locked, freezing mid-step as if carved from marble. It was his cologne, the distinct fragrance worn by one of the boys. Panic seized her, a cold, suffocating grip. Her breath hitched, ragged and shallow, and then came the tears, hot and torrential. I swept her out of there, moving with an urgency born of pure maternal instinct, her small, trembling body clutched against mine. The entire drive home, she sobbed inconsolably, whispering, "I'm sorry, Mama. I'm so sorry for being weak," words that tore at my soul. Later, the counselor called, her voice gentle, reassuring me that setbacks are normal in the healing process. But it didn't feel normal. It felt like we were spiraling backward, caught in a cruel, inescapable current. That night, the kitchen table, usually a place of warm family meals, became a grim war room. I sat surrounded by the growing mountain of evidence we had meticulously collected, precise phone records with their irrefutable timestamps, the stark medical reports, the detailed witness statements now including the custodian's sworn testimony. Each fragment, like a piece of a shattered mirror, reflected a part of the agonizing truth of what had really transpired that day. The school, in their endless cycle of deflection, kept reiterating their commitment to ongoing investigation, yet nothing tangible ever seemed to change. Those boys, the perpetrators, continued to stride freely through the hallways, their lives uninterrupted, while my daughter, their victim, couldn't even manage to walk down a corridor without being overwhelmed by terror. The district, ever keen on maintaining appearances, dispatched another impersonal letter, droning on about their comprehensive review of existing policies. But it was all just empty rhetoric. Carefully crafted words designed to soothe, to placate, to ultimately make the problem disappear quietly. They wanted this nightmare to vanish into the bureaucratic ether, but I, armed with truth and unwavering resolve, was not going to let that happen. Every single day brought with it a fresh wave of bureaucracy, a new stack of legal paperwork demanding attention, consuming precious time and energy. There were court dates looming for the principal's absurd restraining order, urgent meetings with Dimitri, and an endless parade of forms to meticulously fill out. Each line a reminder of the relentless fight. All this, while Leia remained at home, a prisoner of her trauma, trying desperately to heal from the profound wounds they had inflicted upon her. The very system designed to protect her had, in its shocking indifference, failed completely. Now, our fight wasn't just for her recovery, but against that broken system itself, a desperate struggle for the most basic, fundamental justice. 3 days later, Dimitri's voice sliced through the hum of my workday, an urgent summons. The district attorney wanted to meet regarding my property damage charges. My heart sank. I drove to his office, the journey a blur of simmering frustration. He laid out the terms of a plea deal, a misdemeanor charge for property damage, coupled with probation and the payment for the principal's cracked window. He earnestly urged me to accept, explaining that fighting these charges, however justifiable my actions, could be strategically disastrous. It risked complicating Leia's far more significant case and, more insidiously, painting me as unstable or unreasonable in the eyes of the court. Every instinct in my gut screamed to fight, to stand firm, to passionately explain the righteous fury that had driven me to break that window to save my child. But Dimitri, ever the pragmatist, kept repeating, "Leia needs stability, now more than you need to prove a point." The words were a bitter pill, but the truth in them was undeniable. With a heavy sigh, a profound sense of injustice weighing on my soul, I signed the papers. Admitting guilt for attempting to save my daughter felt like a betrayal, a moral compromise, but I made it, for Leia. The very next morning, a call from Colin Burgess, a district administrator, offered a new kind of indignity. He was calling about interim safety measures for Leia's eventual return to school, a response clearly precipitated by our legal momentum. Their proposed plan was a patchwork of superficial fixes. Carefully orchestrated schedule changes to ensure Leia wouldn't cross paths with those boys, the provision of an adult escort to shepherd her between classes, and exclusive access to a private bathroom. I listened, meticulously noting every glaring gap in their hastily constructed solution. What about the chaotic unpredictability of fire drills? What about school-wide assemblies? What if the assigned escort was absent, or merely distracted? Burgess, his voice smooth and practiced, kept insisting this was the best they could do while their investigation lumbered on. but their best hadn't been nearly good enough to protect her before, had it? So why, I wondered with a bitter, rhetorical sting, would it suddenly be sufficient now? Just 2 days later, an ordinary errand became another terrifying confrontation. I was loading groceries into my car, the mundane rhythm of bags clinking, when a man's voice, sharp and accusatory, called my name. I turned, startled, to see a man in a crisp suit striding purposefully, almost aggressively, toward me. He introduced himself, his tone dripping with veiled menace. As one of the boy's fathers, his words were a torrent of dismissive blame. I was ruining his son's future over teenage mistakes that had been blown entirely out of proportion. I kept my back to him, steadfastly continuing to load my groceries. My silence a deliberate wall. But he was relentless, circling my car, his voice rising, detailing his son's alleged plight. He's losing his college scholarships. He's getting death threats online. Then came the explicit threat, cold and calculated. I'll sue you for defamation if you don't make Leia drop these charges. I clambered into my car, fumbling with the keys, the engine roaring to life. But he pressed on, his face now inches from my window, spouting the tired, insidious refrain about boys doing stupid things sometimes and how we were destroying his family. My desk cam, a silent, ever-vigilant witness, was recording everything. Every word, every threat, every twisted justification. And then, a crucial slip, a moment of inadvertent honesty dressed in a flimsy excuse. My son might have gotten carried away, he conceded. But he didn't mean any real harm. The words hung in the air, a devastating admission. I peeled away, leaving him still ranting in the parking lot, and immediately saved that video file, a new, powerful piece of evidence in our relentless fight. That very afternoon, the district, in a remarkable feat of narrative manipulation, circulated an email to all parents. It meticulously described the incident not as a horrific assault, but as a mere student conflict that had been addressed through proper channels. They then launched into a self-congratulatory ode to their quick response and unwavering commitment to student safety. Not a single mention of the actual assault, nor the inconvenient truth that I, Leia's mother, had been forced to break a window, a literal shattering of barriers, just to get help. The goal was breathtaking. Fueled by a fresh surge of indignation, I immediately began crafting a comprehensive response, a counter-narrative meticulously outlining the actual timeline, detailing every single text message, every phone call, and, most damningly, the agonizing length of time it took for each person, each department, each level of their supposed system, to respond. The truth, I vowed, would not be buried. To respond, or not to respond, that was the agonizing question. A constant internal debate on how to articulate the profound systemic failures we had witnessed. In my initial, raw draft, I meticulously detailed every infuriating misstep. The secretary, utterly impervious, stubbornly refusing to budge from her desk. Her gaze fixed on some trivial task while chaos simmered just beyond her peripheral vision. The principal, a picture of appalling nonchalance, merely holding up 5 fingers a casual, almost flippant gesture signaling her lunch break seemingly oblivious to the escalating crisis within her school. And, most damningly, the trio of boys, armed with keys they had absolutely no right to possess, keys that represented a catastrophic breach of security. Dimitri, ever the pragmatic voice of reason, reviewed my impassioned account. With a sigh, he made me excise the sections where I bluntly labeled the staff incompetent and negligent. His argument was that such overt accusations, no matter how profoundly true, would only detract from the factual narrative, even though, in the deepest corners of my being, I knew those words were precisely and unequivocally what they were. Later that evening, the phone rang, and it was Detective Norris, her voice calm but resolute, calling with a much-anticipated update on her investigation. She had spent the last 2 days meticulously interviewing all 3 boys, separately, allowing no opportunity for them to collude or synchronize their stories. The results were starkly revealing. Their narratives were not just different, they were diametrically opposed, a fractured kaleidoscope of desperate lies. One boy, with brazen denial, vehemently asserted he had never even set foot in that bathroom at all. Another, attempting a cruel twist of victim blaming, claimed Leia had actively invited them in, asserting that everything that transpired was entirely consensual. The third, perhaps sensing the futility of outright denial, admitted to being present but craftily shifted blame, insisting the other two had forced him to merely watch, and that his hands had never once touched her. Their parents, swiftly mobilizing to protect their sons, had already retained legal counsel, who were now frantically attempting to orchestrate a unified defense, a coordinated tapestry of deceit. But it was far too late. Detective Norris, with foresight and diligence, had already recorded their initial, unvarnished statements. She shared her astute observation with a hint of grim satisfaction. These flagrant contradictions, she explained, actually bolstered our case considerably because, as she sagely put it, innocent people don't need to coordinate lies. A week later, just as the aroma of dinner began to waft through our home, a firm, unexpected knock echoed at our front door. Standing on our porch were 2 individuals from Child Protective Services, their presence immediate and unsettling, clipboards clutched in their hands. They informed us, with an air of professional detachment, that they needed to conduct a mandatory home visit, a standard procedure given the case involved a minor. It felt like an invasion, a complete stripping away of our privacy as they meticulously walked through our house, their eyes scrutinizing every detail. They checked if Leia's bedroom offered a safe, nurturing space, if our pantry held enough food to sustain a growing child, and if I, under their clinical gaze, appeared stable enough to provide adequate care for her. The entire experience was profoundly humiliating, having complete strangers dissect and judge the sanctity of our home, our competence as caregivers. Yet, in an unexpected turn, the caseworker, after her thorough assessment, actually provided us with a wealth of helpful resources, including contact information for specialized trauma counseling and crucial victim compensation funds. While they ultimately determined Leah was safe in our care, they wisely kept the case open, ensuring a continuous lifeline of support services would remain available to us. A small comfort in a world suddenly turned upside down. 3 weeks deep into Leah's therapy sessions with Samara, a truly amazing, almost miraculous, event unfolded. For the very first time since the attack, Leah slept through the entire night. No sudden, blood-curdling screams piercing the darkness. No agonizing sobs that had become a nightly torment. She had diligently been practicing the grounding techniques Samara had patiently taught her, simple, yet profoundly effective exercises like naming 5 things she could see around her, then 4 things she could hear, and finally 3 things she could physically touch. That morning, she descended the stairs, her eyes clear and bright, a genuine look of rest gracing her face for the first time in what felt like an eternity. We marked this quiet, monumental victory with her favorite blueberry pancakes, a silent, unspoken celebration. We didn't need to articulate why this particular morning was special. We both intrinsically understood that this was, unequivocally, a huge, life-altering turning point. Meanwhile, Detective Norris had been tirelessly engaged in a flurry of legal activity, orchestrating subpoenas and meticulously gathering evidence. Her next call brought truly significant news, a breakthrough that sent a jolt of hope through us. She had successfully obtained the principal's phone records from the very day of the incident. These records, irrefutable and damning, clearly showed multiple calls flooding in during her lunch break, urgent calls that went deliberately unanswered. The digital evidence unequivocally proved what we had suspected all along. She had been lying, brazenly denying any knowledge of an emergency. The principal's lawyer, in a desperate attempt to salvage her client's reputation, tried to argue that the records were private and therefore inadmissible in court. But the damage, both legally and reputationally, was already irreversibly done. The stark truth was now laid bare for everyone to see. She had consciously chosen her salad, her personal convenience, over the immediate safety and well-being of a student. Could there be a more damning indictment of her moral compass? The following Monday, Leah, with a tentative step towards reclaiming a semblance of normalcy, expressed a desire to retrieve something specific from her locker, even though she wasn't yet ready to resume classes. To minimize any potential stress or exposure, we decided to go early, well before the school hallways would fill with students. As she cautiously swung open her locker door, a crumpled piece of paper fluttered out, landing innocently at her feet. What was written on it, however, was anything but innocent. Someone had scrawled a cruel, hateful message, branding her a lying bitch who was ruining good kids' lives. Her small body immediately began to tremble violently, and her breath hitched in her throat, a clear sign of a panic attack taking hold. My heart ached with fury. I quickly snapped photos of the venomous note, preserving the evidence, then marched directly to the principal's office. My resolve hardened. After a heated confrontation, they finally, grudgingly, agreed to install additional surveillance cameras near her locker and around the classroom areas. It felt like a meager, insufficient response, a frustratingly small concession, but it was, undeniably, something a stark improvement over their previous, infuriating policy of doing absolutely nothing. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the very next week, a formal and somewhat intimidating affair. The judge, with a somber impartiality, listened attentively to both sides of the highly contentious arguments. In the end, she issued mutual stay-away orders, a surprising decision that leveled criticism at both the principal's inexcusably delayed response to the crisis and, to my dismay, my own active property damage. With a severe, no-nonsense tone, she declared, we both acted inappropriately, even though the situations weren't remotely comparable. Afterward, Dimitri, ever the strategic thinker, offered a pragmatic assessment that momentarily tempered my indignation. This was actually good, he explained, because the judge didn't label me as the sole aggressor, which would have severely prejudiced Leah's case moving forward. The principal now also has to stay away from us, which means she can't as easily testify or undermine my character regarding my behavior that day. It certainly wasn't the absolute vindication I had so desperately craved. Not the clear-cut victory my emotional side demanded, but in this profoundly messed up system, with its labyrinthine complexities and frustrating compromises, Dimitri assured me, it absolutely counted as a win. Just 3 days later, the phone rang, and it was Cullen Burgess, summoning me to an executive session at the district office. Walking into the conference room, I found him seated gravely alongside 2 impeccably dressed lawyers. With a visible air of discomfort, Burgess finally admitted, in no uncertain terms, that the school had utterly failed to follow any of the proper protocols or right steps when Leah had first reported the boys following her home months ago. The district, clearly desperate to avoid a federal complaint of potential catastrophe that would expose their systemic negligence on a much grander scale, was now offering mediation as an alternative to a protracted, costly legal battle in court. Burgess repeatedly rubbed his forehead, a clear sign of stress, his gaze darting nervously to a stack of papers on the table. These were our papers, chronicling every ignored plea, every unanswered call for help, every instance where we had reached out to the school only to be met with a wall of indifference. The lawyers, with a practiced smoothness, then pushed a formidable stack of forms across the polished table, presenting their offer, counseling funds for Leia and long overdue policy changes within the school, all contingent upon us signing away our right to sue. The weight of that decision pressed heavily upon me as I gathered the papers, needing time, space, and quiet deliberation to truly comprehend the magnitude of what they were proposing. But that very same afternoon, before I could even begin to process the district's offer, Dimitri called with news that literally made my hands tremble. Another girl's lawyer had recently contacted Detective Norris, revealing a horrifyingly similar account. Those exact same 3 boys had cornered his client in an empty classroom just last year. She had been too terrified, too traumatized, to tell anyone about her ordeal until she heard about Leia's courageous stand. The girl's detailed statement painted an eerily identical pattern of predatory behavior. The boys would first follow her, then make explicit comments about her body, before finally trapping her alone. Detective Norris, her voice crackling with a newfound urgency, emphatically stated that this changes everything. Now, we had irrefutable proof, not merely of their prior actions, but of a deeply disturbing pattern, solid evidence that the school should have known about these dangerous individuals. She dedicated the next 2 weeks to meticulously compiling a case file, a towering stack of documents thicker than a phone book, crammed with additional witness statements, painstakingly detailed timeline charts, and crucial security footage from both harrowing incidents. When she finally submitted this formidable dossier to the district attorney's office, she called to offer a crucial warning. Prosecutors, she explained, rarely file all the charges police recommend. Yet, she assured us, she had fought with every fiber of her being to ensure as many charges as humanly possible were brought against the boys. The waiting period that followed was truly awful, an agonizing stretch of uncertainty that gnawed at our nerves. But after what felt like an interminable 10 days, the DA's office finally called Dimitri with their decision. They had indeed filed criminal assault charges against 2 of the boys, the perpetrators facing the full force of adult justice. The youngest one's case, however, was remanded to juvenile court, a procedural necessity since he had just turned 17. While some charges were regrettably dropped due to a frustrating lack of tangible physical evidence, the main, critical assault charges firmly stuck. This was, as Norris had pointed out, a significant victory, far more than most victims ever see in a system often skewed against them. That very same week, I had to confront my own legal challenges as the plea offer for breaking the principal's window came due. Dimitri, ever the strategist, advised me to accept the misdemeanor deal. He argued that it would strategically benefit Leia's case by demonstrating that I wasn't some crazy violent person, but rather a desperate parent who acted out of intense frustration. He believed the judge would likely grant me probation, coupled with community service, an outcome that would underscore my commitment to accountability without overshadowing the gravity of Leia's situation. Of jail time, the air in that courtroom felt thick, suffocating as I stood there, a knot of humiliation and injustice tightening in my stomach. Admitting guilt for property damage, my voice barely a whisper, while those boys, the actual perpetrators of so much pain, hadn't even faced formal charges, let alone an arraignment. The sheer unfairness of it all made my throat burn, a searing sensation of suppressed rage and disbelief. Yet, I signed the papers, the pen feeling impossibly heavy in my shaking hand, resigning myself to 6 months of probation and a grueling 200 hours picking up trash along the hot, dusty highways. It was a tangible punishment for an act born of desperation, a stark contrast to the intangible consequences for others. Meanwhile, the title Its Investigation, which had dragged on for what felt like an eternity, finally concluded. The official report, meticulously crafted and filled with administrative jargon, presented results that, on paper, certainly sounded promising. But in reality, they felt utterly hollow, like an exquisitely wrapped gift containing nothing but air. Their punishment: the boys were merely removed from campus temporarily, relegated to the sterile anonymity of online schooling, a solution that felt more like a mild inconvenience than true accountability. In stark contrast, Leia, who had endured the trauma, was assigned a tutor, not for academic enrichment, but simply to help her claw back from the chasm of missed work. A constant reminder of the days stolen from her. And the principal, the one entrusted with student safety, was placed on administrative leave, a bureaucratic euphemism that signaled more than it stated. The district, ever careful, never once uttered the words "we were wrong" or "we failed," but their carefully orchestrated actions, the temporary removal, the principal's sidelining, the sudden provision of a tutor for Leia spoke volumes. They were a silent confession, a resounding echo of everything their meticulously coached lawyers would never, could never, allow them to say out loud, yet were screamed by their every move. Barely 2 weeks before the looming criminal trial, Leia faced yet another harrowing ordeal, testifying at a closed preliminary hearing. This wasn't the full trial, but a crucial gatekeeping step to determine if the evidence was substantial enough to proceed, and it felt just as intimidating. Her dedicated advocate remained a steadfast presence, holding Leia's hand, a silent anchor in a turbulent sea of legal jargon and probing questions. From across the hushed courtroom, I watched, my heart clenching, as Leia answered, her voice a fragile thread, reliving the horrific details of that day in the bathroom. I could see the tremor running through her small frame, a visible manifestation of her terror, even from that distance. The defense lawyer, sharp-suited and relentless, employed every tactic in their playbook, attempting to disorient and discredit her with a barrage of nitpicking questions about exact timestamps, impossible to recall sequences, and the cruelly loaded "why didn't you scream louder?" Yet, with an astonishing reserve of strength, Leia persevered, navigating the treacherous cross-examination. She didn't crumble, didn't shatter completely, emerging from the crucible of that hearing bruised but unbroken. Afterward, in the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway, Leia looked utterly drained, her face pale, her movements slow and deliberate. But amidst the profound exhaustion, a flicker of something new, something resolute, shone in her eyes. Facing them, she whispered, her voice still hoarse. It made me feel stronger. A poignant paradox, considering she admitted that every single word uttered during the hearing had been terrifying. Each question a fresh stab of fear. That very weekend, almost as if the universe was responding, a reporter from the local paper dropped a bombshell, a massive, meticulously researched investigative piece exposing the systemic failures of how schools handle assault cases. Our story, meticulously anonymized and stripped of names, served as a stark, central example, a chilling case study. The article was damning, replete with stark, unambiguous charts that graphically illustrated the alarming number of assault reports that were not just mishandled, but outright ignored. It featured searing quotes from child safety experts who unequivocally stated that educational institutions, driven by a perverse logic, consistently prioritized institutional liability and public image over the fundamental safety and well-being of their students. The article's impact was immediate, a seismic shockwave. Within mere hours, the school board, caught completely off guard, scrambled to announce emergency meetings, a hasty attempt to project an image of proactive concern. Suddenly, board meetings, once sparsely attended, were overflowing with indignant parents, their voices unified and resolute, demanding nothing less than radical, systemic changes. But while public pressure mounted on the school, my personal storm was brewing. The very next Monday, my boss, his expression carefully neutral, called me into his office. HR, he informed me with a detached, clinical tone, had reviewed everything. Their decision, a 2-week unpaid suspension, a punitive measure ostensibly for missing work during the incident and, more chillingly, for creating negative publicity for the company. It felt like a betrayal, a punishment for daring to fight for my child. They even made me sign a performance improvement plan, a demeaning document demanding monthly check-ins, as if my dedication was suddenly in question. And yes, everyone at work looked at me differently, now a subtle shift, a widening gulf of suspicion or pity. Yet, in the midst of that corporate censure, I clung to one crucial, fragile victory. I had, against all odds, managed to keep my health insurance, a lifeline for Leia's mounting therapy bills. Ironically, that unjust 2-week suspension, intended to punish and silence me, inadvertently granted me a precious commodity, time. Time I desperately needed to drive Leia to a new therapy support group specifically designed for teen assault survivors, a lifeline Samra had so thoughtfully recommended. Each week, I'd park the car in the quiet lot, watching Leia walk toward the building, a mixture of trepidation and hope in my chest. While I sat there, trying to distract myself by scrolling through endless emails on my phone, she would disappear inside, into a safe, sacred space. A room where 5 other girls, each bearing their own invisible scars, sat together. Girls who understood truly, profoundly understood what Leia had endured, without the agonizing burden of needing explanations, without judgment, without forced platitudes. After an hour, she would emerge, her eyes often red-rimmed, betraying the raw emotion that had been shared. But invariably, there was something undeniably different in her posture. It was as if she had finally, after months of carrying an invisible burden, been able to put down an impossibly heavy weight, her shoulders slightly less hunched, her breathing a fraction lighter. She never divulged the specific conversations or shared stories from within those walls. That space was hers, a sanctuary of shared vulnerability. But on the drive home, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows, she broke the silence with a single, profound sentence, delivered in a quiet, almost reverent tone. That instantly made every agonizing step we'd taken, every sacrifice, every burning injustice, utterly worth it. I survived. It wasn't a question, nor a declaration of triumph, but a quiet, deeply felt acknowledgement of her own resilience. She recounted how, when she had spoken those 2 simple words in the group, the other girls had simply nodded, a silent, powerful affirmation of their shared experience. In that moment, surrounded by peers who truly got it, for the very first time since this nightmare began, Leia had felt profoundly, unequivocally, less alone in the isolating horror of what had happened to her. The invisible chains of solitude had, for a precious hour, been loosened. Just 3 days later, the phone rang, displaying the district's caller ID. It was their lawyers, their voices now carefully modulated, dripping with a newfound, almost saccharine politeness, as they presented their mediation offer. I could practically hear the unspoken plea in their measured tones. They desperately wanted this whole, messy affair to simply disappear, to fade into quiet oblivion without further public spectacle. True to form, they still refused, with a stubborn, infuriating consistency, to utter any admission of wrongdoing or culpability on the part of the school. Yet, their proposed actions spoke volumes, painting a picture of undeniable concession. They would cover all of Leia's therapy costs, from past bills to future sessions. A significant financial burden lifted. Furthermore, they committed to bringing in esteemed outside experts to conduct a comprehensive, no-holds-barred review of their emergency response protocols, promising a systematic overhaul. And perhaps most significantly, they would mandate that every single staff member, from teachers to janitorial staff, Complete a staggering 40 hours of intensive training specifically focused on effectively handling student safety situations, a sweeping educational initiative that plainly acknowledged vast, glaring deficiencies. Every fiber of my being screamed for them to explicitly admit their egregious failures, to acknowledge the immense harm they had inflicted upon us. But Dimitri, ever the voice of reason and pragmatic wisdom, gently yet firmly reminded me of our true priority. Getting Leia's treatment paid for, he had insisted, matters infinitely more than your need for them to articulate a hollow apology out loud. He was right, of course. My personal thirst for vindication, for an explicit "we are sorry," had to yield to Leia's tangible, immediate needs. And so, with a heavy heart and hands that visibly trembled not from fear, but from the immense, agonizing effort of holding back every single furious, heartbroken word I wanted to scream at them, I signed their papers, sealing a deal board of compromise rather than complete justice. The very next week, we found ourselves in a small, comforting office, meeting with a new counselor. This wasn't just any counselor, she was a specialist. Someone whose entire expertise lay in the delicate and complex process of helping children navigate their return to school environments after experiencing profound trauma. She understood the labyrinth and emotional landscape Leia was traversing. As she gently, patiently, spread out various papers detailing a spectrum of reintegration options, I could feel Leia's small hand, clammy and tight, gripping mine fiercely under the table, a silent testament to the churning anxiety beneath her calm exterior. The counselor, with an empathetic understanding, suggested a remarkably gradual approach, starting with just 2 morning classes, focusing on core subjects like math and English. Crucially, she emphasized the availability of a dedicated quiet room, a safe haven Leia could retreat to at any moment if the sensory overload or emotional strain became too intense. And, acknowledging the terror of isolated spaces, an adult escort would be assigned to walk her diligently between buildings, ensuring she was never, not for a single moment, left alone in the vast, echoing hallways. Leia's voice, when she finally spoke, was barely above a whisper, a fragile, almost inaudible thread. Yet, within that faint sound, lay an immense courage. She said she wanted to try. Even as she uttered the words, I could see her entire body visibly tense, every muscle taut, at the mere thought of walking through those doors again, re-entering the very place where her world had shattered. The weekend before school officially restarted, we embarked on a unique, somber pilgrimage. We practiced the exact route she would take, traversing the silent, eerily empty hallways, each step a rehearsal for the battle ahead. As we walked, Leia, with a chilling pragmatism, pointed out specific safe spots, strategic havens she could bolt to if the fear became overwhelming. There was the counselor's office on the 2nd floor, a designated sanctuary. The nurse's station, brightly lit and near the front entrance, a beacon of immediate help, and the library, with its often overlooked back exit, a literal escape route she could utilize if she felt the desperate need to leave fast. Monday morning, with its stark reality, arrived far too swiftly, a cruel acceleration of time. Leia, her face a mask of apprehension, slowly put on her brand new backpack, a symbol of a fresh start, yet her hands, stubbornly, wouldn't stop shaking as she adjusted the straps. Still, with a quiet fortitude that astounded me, she got into the car anyway. I drove slower than usual, deliberately extending the short journey, hoping to buy her a few more precious minutes to mentally brace herself for what lay ahead. At the side entrance, the designated escort met us, a wonderfully kind, older woman whose gentle eyes conveyed immediate warmth and understanding. She had been thoroughly briefed on every sensitive detail of Leia's situation, a testament to the district's newfound commitment. As this compassionate woman walked Leia towards her first class, a solitary figure disappearing into the bustling school, I remained in the parking lot, unable to leave. For 2 agonizing hours, I sat there, engine off, phone clutched in hand, a silent sentinel, just in case she needed me, a human safety net hovering at the periphery. Against all my anxious expectations, she made it through both classes, the morning passing without a single distress call from her. A wave of relief washed over me. The counselor, however, sent a brief, reassuring text update. Leia had indeed utilized the quiet room twice, retreating to that designated sanctuary to perform her breathing exercises, finding calm when the cacophony of the hallways between periods had become overwhelming, a swirling vortex of noise and bodies. When I picked her up promptly at 11:30, her exhaustion was palpable, etched clearly on her face. Deep, bruised-looking dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her shoulders were noticeably hunched forward, as if still braced for an invisible blow. But amidst that profound weariness, there was something else, something subtle yet undeniable, radiating from her, a tiny, defiant spark of pride. A quiet, fierce triumph that, despite everything, she had done it. She had faced her fears, stepped back into that daunting environment, and survived. Our immediate destination, a non-negotiable celebration of her bravery, was the local ice cream shop, even though it was barely noon. Rules, at that moment, felt irrelevant. Leia, with a newfound sense of self-entitlement, ordered 3 generous scoops of wildly different, vibrant flavors, a delicious rebellion. I, ever the creature of habit, stuck to my usual, dependable vanilla. We settled onto a sun-warmed bench outside, eating slowly, savoring each bite, as Leia recounted the small, but profoundly impactful, details of her morning. Her English teacher, she explained, had welcomed her back with genuine warmth, expertly navigating the delicate situation by acknowledging her return without making any big deal about her absence, or what had transpired, a masterful act of empathy. 3 weeks passed, settling into this fragile, carefully constructed new routine, each day a small victory. Then, one Tuesday morning, an email from the district landed in my inbox. The subject line read, "Important personnel changes," and buried deep within the bureaucratic language, hinting at a seismic shift that was yet to fully unfold, lay. In the very center of the bulletin, tucked away almost as an afterthought, was a single, curt line detailing the principal's immediate reassignment to a curriculum development position within the district office. While the teachers' union had, in its bureaucratic wisdom, managed to shield her from the complete and utter professional annihilation she arguably deserved, there was at least a small, cold comfort in knowing she would no longer stalk the school hallways, no longer cast her indifferent gaze upon the vulnerable. Instead, she was banished to some likely windowless, airless cubicle, her days now condemned to the mind-numbing task of reviewing textbooks, a far cry, indeed, from her previous, devastatingly negligent practice of ignoring students in crisis. Was this true justice, or merely a bureaucratic sidestep? A question that lingered, sharp and unanswered. Later that same afternoon, the quiet hum of our new, tentative normalcy was pierced by Dimitri's call. His voice, usually so steady, held a note of guarded optimism as he shared the update. The boys' cases were finally, unequivocally moving forward. Specifically, the lawyer representing the youngest of the three had initiated a conversation, signaling an interest in exploring a possible plea deal. This wasn't just a simple negotiation. It was a package designed to include mandatory, court-ordered treatment, perhaps a glimmer of hope that some underlying issues would be addressed. Not just punished alongside permanent restraining orders. These weren't mere temporary injunctions. They were legal shackles intended to follow him, a shadow stretching into his adulthood, even long after he turned 18. A constant, undeniable reminder of the boundaries he had crossed. The other two, predictably, remained defiant. Their expensive, high-powered lawyers a relentless tide, filing motion after motion, employing every legal maneuver imaginable to chip away at the prosecution's case, to get crucial evidence dismissed and thrown out. But there was a strategic brilliance to this potential plea. The one who accepted the deal would be compelled to fully articulate and detail precisely what transpired as an integral part of his plea. This admission, a concession essentially, would serve as a powerful, undeniable testimony, undeniably bolstering the prosecution's hand in the remaining two cases. After dinner that evening, I relayed the day's developments to Leia. She listened, her gaze distant, her small frame still seeming to carry the weight of untold burdens. As I spoke, she slowly, deliberately nodded, absorbing each word, each implication. When I finished, a fragile sigh escaped her lips before she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, saying she felt a little safer, just a little. It wasn't complete peace, not yet, but it was a perceptible easing of the constant tension that had gripped her. The knowledge that at least one of them had admitted to their actions, had acknowledged the truth, offered a strange, unexpected solace. Even if that admission was a calculated move, a cynical play for a lighter sentence, it still felt like a small, hard-won victory in the long, drawn-out battle for truth. Doesn't the truth, even extracted under duress, hold its own inherent power? Saturday morning arrived, bathed in the soft promise of a new day, and we made our way to the bustling garden center. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and verdant growth, a welcome contrast to the stale, heavy air of legal proceedings and shadowed memories. Leia, with a quiet intensity, walked among the saplings, her eyes scanning, searching, until she finally settled on a small oak tree. Her fingers, still so delicate, traced the surprisingly rough texture of its thin trunk, a silent, tender connection. Meanwhile, I busied myself, methodically loading heavy bags of rich, dark soil and aromatic mulch into our overflowing cart, preparing for the ritual of new beginnings. Back home, in a sun-drenched corner of our backyard, a spot chosen for its promise of abundant morning light, we began to dig. Our shovels moved in rhythmic harmony, breaking the earth, turning the soil. We worked in comfortable, companionable silence, neither of us needing to articulate the unspoken symbolism of the act. We didn't talk about what this small, resilient sapling might mean, what hopes or fears it might represent for us, for Leia's slow, arduous journey of healing. Instead, our focus was singularly, almost religiously, on the practicalities, ensuring the hole was deep enough, that its tender roots would have ample room to spread. To anchor themselves firmly in the earth, it was about creating a secure foundation, a nurturing space, much like we were striving to do for Leia herself. And then, a new ritual began. Every single morning thereafter, without fail, Leia would steal outside before the school bus arrived. It was a sacred duty, performed with the gravity of a most vital task, as if the fate of the entire world hinged on those few precious moments. From the quiet sanctuary of the kitchen window, I would watch her, a silent observer of her unwavering dedication to this one small, living thing. It was, I realized, the one small thing she could control, a tangible anchor in a world that had, for too long, felt entirely out of her grasp. 3 months, slow and heavy as molasses, gradually crawled by. They were marked by the relentless schedule of therapy sessions twice a week, peeling back layers of trauma. By the tentative return to school for 3 mornings a week, a hesitant step back into a semblance of normalcy. And by an endless string of court dates that, with infuriating predictability, kept getting postponed, stretching the agony of waiting, denying us any real sense of closure. The entire process felt like slogging through a dense, suffocating fog, each day a battle against unseen forces. Then, one unremarkable Tuesday evening, as we stood side by side in the kitchen, engaged in the comforting, mundane act of making spaghetti together, I made a stupid, silly joke. Something about the strands of pasta looking like a pile of squirming worms, a feeble attempt at lightness. And then it happened. Leia actually laughed. Not just a polite, strained curve of the lips, or a fleeting, almost apologetic chuckle. No, this was a real laugh, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated from her very stomach, raw and unrestrained. It was a sound I hadn't heard in what felt like an eternity, a melody I feared had been silenced forever. It lasted for only a fleeting second, a fragile, brilliant spark, before she seemed to catch herself, the familiar quietness instantly descending once more. But in that singular, precious moment, she had sounded like herself again. She sounded like the girl who used to belt out pop songs in the shower with joyous abandon, who left her shoes scattered haphazardly across every room, who would argue with me, with fiery indignation, about the unfairness of her curfew. It was a profound, breathtaking glimpse of the Leia we had lost, a tantalizing promise that she might, indeed, be coming back to us. Now, as I sit here at our kitchen table, the soft glow of the lamp illuminating my screen, I type these words. Across from me, Leia is diligently working on her geometry homework, her brow furrowed in concentration. Occasionally, she pauses, looking up to ask for help with a particularly tricky problem, even though I know, deep down, that she possesses all the intelligence and capability to solve them herself. It's not really about the math, is it? It's about the connection, the comfort of shared presence, the quiet reassurance that I am here, right beside her. She's eased back into school on a part-time basis, enveloped by a carefully constructed network of support systems designed to nurture and protect her. Most nights now, she sleeps soundly, undisturbed by the terror of nightmares that once haunted her waking and sleeping hours. And yes, the boys' cases continue their glacial, inexorable inching through the labyrinthine legal system. But here's the quiet truth. We don't feel the compulsive need to check for updates every single day anymore. The obsessive anxiety has receded, replaced by a more sustainable, if still fragile, rhythm. We're not over what happened, because how does one simply get over something so profoundly shattering, so deeply scarring? You don't. That kind of trauma isn't erased. It's integrated. Instead, we are learning to live with it, to carry its indelible marks, choosing to face each day as it comes, one breath, one small victory, one fragile moment at a time. And right now, in this quiet, ordinary Tuesday evening, that is enough. Thanks for hanging out with me today, for bearing witness to our journey. Seriously, if we actually take a moment to stop, truly stop and pay attention, life is constantly, relentlessly throwing powerful lessons at us, isn't it? Until our paths cross again, my friend. And if you made it all the way to this very last sentence, please do me a favor and drop a comment below. I genuinely love reading every single one of your thoughts and insights.